My wife said she needed one final goodbye dinner with her affair partner, so I made sure it was her last night as my wife and filed for divorce. I'm 29 years old, and I used to think I had everything figured out. Her laughter used to echo through our hallway like something alive and vibrant, filling every corner of our home with warmth. I remember that sound so clearly now, how it would bounce off the walls and make even the most ordinary moments feel special. Jessica had this way of leaning into me at breakfast every morning, her hair still damp from the shower and smelling like that vanilla shampoo she always used. She'd steal bites of my pancakes because she claimed mine always tasted better than hers, even though we used the exact same recipe. It was one of those small, endearing habits that couples develop over time. That's how it was for years between us, filled with small things and quiet moments that might not seem grand to outsiders, but everything felt real and solid. I genuinely thought we were unshakable as a couple. Maybe we had a few cracks here and there, like any relationship, but I believed we were still standing strong together. But I've learned that people don't fall apart like walls do in some dramatic collapse. Instead, they rot from the inside slowly and quietly, deteriorating bit by bit without you even noticing. Until one day, you lean against them for support, and the whole thing just crumbles under your weight, leaving you stunned and covered in debris. It was exactly 8:15 p.m. when I heard the knock at our front door. It wasn't a loud, urgent knock that demanded immediate attention. Just 3 sharp, controlled taps that somehow felt deliberate and calculated. I was out in the garage at the time, working on fixing a strip of wood along my workbench, something mindless to keep my hands busy, because my mind hadn't been still or peaceful in months. I wiped the sawdust off my palms and walked to the front door, unsure of who would be visiting at this hour. When I opened it, Jessica stood there wrapped in that new black trench coat she'd recently bought. The one with the satin lining that she pretended to find on clearance, though I suspected it cost more than she wanted to admit. Something was immediately off about her appearance. Her lipstick was smudged slightly at the corner, and her hair looked too perfect, like she'd spent extra time styling it for someone else. There was a scent clinging to her that I didn't recognize. Something too polished and rehearsed that didn't belong to our house or our life together. She raised one eyebrow and gave me that smirk I used to find charming, but now it felt calculated and cold. "Didn't think I'd find you in here," she said, as if my presence in my own home was somehow surprising. I didn't answer her comment. Instead, I just stepped aside and let her walk past me into the house. She moved with a confidence that felt wrong, like she was reclaiming territory rather than coming home. Maybe she did still own this place in some way. After all, she had picked out the wallpaper in the living room, chosen all the furniture, and selected that expensive dining table we hadn't actually sat at together in months. She kicked off her heels by the door, leaving them in that careless way she always did, as if that small gesture of domesticity still meant something significant between us. Then, without even bothering to look back at me, she dropped the bombshell that would change everything. "It's just one dinner with him," she said, her voice unnaturally calm and measured. She was speaking like she was trying to sell this line to herself more than to me, but the words hung in the air between us like poison gas. I stood there in the doorway, breathing it in and feeling it burn my lungs. I followed her into the kitchen, watching as she poured herself a glass of wine, like absolutely nothing was wrong, like our marriage wasn't already bleeding from the walls around us. I watched her fingers curl around the stem of the glass with an almost sensual appreciation, and I noticed that her nails were freshly done in a deep red color she had never worn before. At least not for me. "Who is he?" I asked, surprised by how steady my own voice sounded. She looked up at me slowly, and I could see the wheels turning behind her eyes. It was the calculating look of someone deciding exactly how much of the truth they could afford to reveal without completely destroying their position. Then she simply shrugged, as if this was the most casual conversation in the world. "Someone from the office." "What's his name?" I pressed, needing to put a label on this threat to our marriage. For just a split second, her confident smile faltered, but I caught it. "Derek," she said. I nodded slowly, absorbing this information like a physical blow. Derek, a name I had never heard pass through her lips before, but I already hated it with the intensity of a splinter burrowing deep into my brain. "How long has this been going on?" I asked. She took a deliberate sip of her wine, using the pause to compose her response. "Don't do this," she said, but it sounded more like a warning than a plea. I stared at her, refusing to let her deflect. "How long, Jessica?" She set the glass down on the counter with just enough force to make it tremble slightly, and I could see her mask beginning to slip. "Why does it matter? It's not serious. It's nothing important. I actually laughed, but the sound came out wrong and hollow, like an echo in an empty room. Nothing? She folded her arms defensively and leaned back against the counter, her jaw tightening with irritation. It's just dinner. It's just drinks, she said, as if repeating it would make it true. It's just something I needed. You wouldn't understand. Something inside me snapped at those words. Not in a loud, violent way, but like a quiet realization. The kind of moment when a curtain suddenly pulls back and the harsh daylight shows you the mess you've been pretending wasn't there all along. I stepped closer to her, closing the distance between us until I could see the flecks of gold in her eyes that I used to find so beautiful. Tell me the truth, I said quietly. The full truth. She tilted her head slightly, studying me with an expression that was part curiosity and part challenge. Why? So you can cry? Get angry? Break things? She asked, her voice dripping with condescension. No, I replied, my voice steady and calm. So I can decide if I'm walking away now or later. There it was, the first real crack in her armor. Her eyes narrowed as she processed what I had just said, and I could see that she hadn't expected this response from me. You're not going anywhere, she said, but there was something desperate creeping into her voice now. I might, I said simply. No, you won't, she said too quickly, as if she was trying to convince herself as much as me. You'll pout for a week, maybe sleep on the couch for a few nights. You'll write some tragic journal entries in that little notebook of yours, but you won't actually leave. I stared at her, genuinely stunned by the casual cruelty in her voice and the accuracy of her assessment of my past behavior. That's what you do, isn't it? She continued, her voice dropping to something low and almost cruel. You stay no matter what happens. You stay because you think you're being noble, because you think that somehow earns you some kind of moral medal. I didn't say anything in response. I couldn't find the words to defend myself because part of what she was saying felt uncomfortably true. She laughed again. And this time it was bitter and cutting. Don't look at me like that. Like I'm some kind of villain in your story. You stopped seeing me as a real person a long time ago. You turned into this quiet, predictable man who thinks loyalty alone is enough to sustain a marriage. Her words hit me like physical blows, each one finding its mark with surgical precision. You think being home every night automatically makes you a good husband, she continued, warming to her theme. You think buying groceries and asking about my day is supposed to keep me satisfied and fulfilled. But you have no idea what I actually need or want. She walked past me slowly, her heels clicking against the kitchen tile like a metronome, counting down what felt like the last seconds of our life together. At the threshold between the kitchen and living room, she paused and turned back to face me. It's just one dinner with him, she repeated, as if this mantra would somehow make everything acceptable. Then she added the words that would haunt me for weeks. But it's the first one I've actually looked forward to in months. With that devastating final blow, she disappeared into the depths of the house like smoke slipping through a crack in the wall, leaving me standing alone in the kitchen with the echo of her words ringing in my ears. That night, sleep was impossible. I sat on the back porch until the sky slowly turned from black to gray, watching the sunrise paint the horizon in shades of pink and gold. The bottle of whiskey I had brought out remained untouched beside me. I didn't want to numb the pain. I wanted to feel every bit of it and understand what it meant. I stared at our empty backyard, watching the trees sway gently in the morning breeze, their leaves rustling with secrets I couldn't decode. Something fundamental had ended between Jessica and me, and something else entirely was beginning to take its place. I knew with absolute certainty that this wasn't going to be some clean, civilized unraveling where we'd shake hands and wish each other well. I had questions burning in my chest. I had rage simmering just beneath the surface. And deep down in places I didn't want to acknowledge, a plan was already starting to form in my mind. She thought I would stay, thought I would sulk in silence, and pretend to heal while she continued her double life. She was wrong about that. She was wrong about a lot of things, but she was especially wrong about me. The morning after felt like stepping into someone else's house, even though nothing had physically changed. I walked into the kitchen and immediately noticed her coffee mug sitting on the counter, still half full with a lipstick mark on the rim. It was the same shade she had worn the night before. That deep red color that didn't belong to the Jessica I thought I knew. The kind of detail that used to feel intimate and personal now felt like graffiti, something vulgar and deliberate left behind on purpose. She was completely gone from the house. Not just absent from the room, but her car wasn't in the driveway either. There was no note left behind, no text message, absolutely nothing to indicate where she had gone or when she might return. But there was something else that caught my attention immediately. Her laptop was open on the dining table. Jessica never left her laptop open. Not when she was home, not when she was anywhere. She was obsessively private about her digital life, with passwords for everything and privacy settings layered like armor around her online presence. But this morning, she had forgotten. Or maybe, and I've thought about this possibility many times since then, maybe she wanted me to see what I would find. I sat down slowly at the dining table, my pulse pounding in my ears, and every nerve in my body telling me to stop, to walk away, to keep pretending that ignorance was bliss. But I couldn't do it. I had reached the point where I needed to know the truth, no matter how much it might hurt. I clicked on the tab that was still open on her browser. It was Gmail, but not her work email that I was familiar with. This was her personal account, the one she claimed she never used on this computer. I scrolled through the inbox, and at first glance, everything looked clean and normal. Just the usual promotional emails and newsletters. But then I saw it, and my blood turned to ice water in my veins. Derek M. There were dozens of messages between them, most with no subject lines, others with what looked like dates and times. One of them from just a week ago was bolded and unread, with a subject line that made my stomach clench. Just thinking about last night. I clicked on it, even though every instinct I had was screaming at me to stop. I shouldn't have opened it. I shouldn't have read what was inside. But I did, and I read every single word, and it felt like taking a slow-motion punch to the gut, with every sentence landing like a new bruise on my soul. They didn't write about love or romance. This wasn't some fairy tale affair gone wrong, or a story about star-crossed lovers finding each other. This was something much uglier and more primal, quick, impatient, and full of smirking little references to hotel rooms and locked office doors. The messages contained details about things I won't repeat here, but they painted a picture of a relationship that was purely physical and completely devoid of any emotional connection. She wasn't just stepping out of our marriage, she was sprinting away from it as fast as she could possibly go. One of Derek's messages ended with a line that burned itself into my memory. "You're mine on Tuesday, don't chicken out." Jessica had replied with characteristic confidence. "I never do. He doesn't ask questions anymore anyway." He. That was me. She was referring to me like I was some blind, boring dog that had simply stopped barking when strangers entered the house. I closed the laptop and sat in complete silence, staring at the wall across from me. I have no idea how long I remained there, frozen in that moment of terrible clarity. But by the time Jessica finally walked back into the house, wearing sunglasses and carrying herself with no trace of guilt or shame, I was already somewhere else mentally. I had traveled to a place much darker than where I had been before, somewhere I hadn't visited in years. She dropped her keys into the bowl by the entrance with a casual clink and gave me a quick once-over with those calculating eyes. "You're up early," she said, as if this was just another normal morning in our household. I nodded in response, not trusting myself to speak just yet. She moved to the refrigerator and poured herself a glass of orange juice, taking a slow sip while studying me with mild curiosity. "Didn't sleep well?" she asked, and I could hear the faint amusement in her voice. I stared at her, trying to reconcile this woman standing in my kitchen with the person I had thought I married. She glanced over at me with that same amused expression, as if my behavior was mildly entertaining. "What's with the look?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. "I read the emails," I said simply. Her body stiffened for just a moment, a barely perceptible change in posture, but then she quickly recovered and simply shrugged. "Figures," she said, as if she had been expecting this moment all along. "Figures?" I repeated, genuinely confused by her casual response. She turned toward me, folding her arms across her chest in a defensive posture. "What did you expect to find when you went snooping through my private messages?" "I don't know," I said honestly, my voice still remarkably steady. "Maybe some hesitation on your part, maybe a sliver of guilt. But you don't even bother pretending anymore, do you?" She leaned against the counter. Her lips pursed in that expression I had learned to recognize as her preparing for battle. "You think I owe you an apology for what you found?" "I think you owe me honesty," I replied. "Please," she scoffed, and the contempt in her voice was unmistakable. "You stopped caring about this marriage the moment things got hard. You buried yourself in your routines, your schedules, your little projects around the house. I needed something more than that." "So you decided to humiliate me instead?" I asked, feeling the anger beginning to build in my chest. "No," she said coldly, her eyes meeting mine with unflinching directness. "I decided to start living again." The kitchen suddenly felt too small, like the walls were slowly leaning in and crushing the space between us. The air felt thick and suffocating. "And Derek?" I asked, forcing myself to say his name out loud. "He's your ticket to living?" She smiled then, and it wasn't shy or guilty or apologetic. It was proud, almost triumphant. "He makes me feel something real," she said. "That's more than I can say for this house or for you." Something inside me cracked at those words. Not in a loud, dramatic way like a breaking bone, but more like a seam splitting after years of accumulated pressure. I didn't shout at her. I didn't beg or plead for her to reconsider. I just said it calmly, with a clarity that surprised even me. "Then go feel something with him," I said. "You don't live here anymore." She stared at me like I had physically slapped her across the face. The silence between us turned sharp and dangerous, filled with the weight of words that couldn't be taken back. "You're serious?" she asked, and for the first time since she'd walked in, I heard uncertainty in her voice. "As cancer," I replied. She hesitated for just a heartbeat, and I could see her mind working, calculating whether this was a bluff she could call or a line she had finally crossed. But her pride kicked in too quickly for her to back down or show any vulnerability. "Fine," she said, already reaching for her phone. "I'll pack a bag, but you're going to regret this decision." "No," I said with absolute certainty. "I regret waiting this long to make it." She turned without another word and walked upstairs to our bedroom. There were no tears, no dramatic scenes, no pleading or bargaining, just the sound of her footsteps on the stairs and the quiet determination of someone who had already made her choice long before this conversation ever took place. I sat back down at the dining table and stared at the coffee mug she had left on the counter. It was still half full, still marked with that lipstick that didn't belong to the woman I had married. I picked it up, walked to the sink, and dumped the contents down the drain. She took exactly 19 minutes to pack her belongings. I counted every single one of them, not out of pettiness or spite, but out of sheer disbelief. 19 minutes to dismantle 7 years of marriage, to reduce everything we had built together to 2 duffel bags and a phone charger. I could hear the sounds drifting down from upstairs, drawers opening and closing, the quiet thuds of her heels hitting the floor as she kicked them off, hangers clattering against each other like skeletons dancing as she stripped our closet bare of anything that belonged to her. She didn't cry, didn't pause once to reconsider what she was doing. There was no hesitation in her movements, no moment where she stopped to think about what she was throwing away. That silence from upstairs was somehow louder than any screaming match we had never had. It spoke volumes about how prepared she had been for this moment, how long she had been mentally packing those bags before I ever discovered the truth. When she finally came down the stairs, she didn't even bother to look at me. She just marched toward the front door like this was some casual weekend getaway, her jaw set with determination and her eyes focused straight ahead. "You're really doing this?" I asked, because some part of me still needed her to flinch, to show even the slightest sign of uncertainty or regret. But she didn't slow down, didn't even break her stride. "You told me to," she said matter-of-factly. "That was supposed to be a test," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You weren't supposed to pass it." She stopped at the door then and turned to face me, one hand already on the handle. Her eyes met mine, and they were sharp and cold as winter glass. "You always wait for me to break first," she said. "You never fight for anything. That's your problem. You think being silent makes you righteous or noble or something," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "It doesn't. It just makes you easy to walk away from." That observation hit me harder than anything she had written to Derek, harder than any of the cruel things she had said during our kitchen confrontation. It cut deep because it contained an uncomfortable grain of truth that I wasn't ready to examine. I had grown silent over the months leading up to this moment. I had retreated into myself, withdrawing from confrontation and convincing myself that I was being patient and strong. But maybe all I had really been doing was watching the slow death of our marriage from a front row seat, passively observing the destruction instead of fighting to prevent it. Still, she didn't get to rewrite our entire history just to make herself feel better about her choices. "I was trying not to make things worse," I said quietly. "And that's exactly why I'm leaving," she replied, opening the door wide. The bright sunlight from outside cut into our dark hallway like a knife, illuminating her silhouette and making her look like some twisted painting of departure. Just before she crossed the threshold and walked out of my life, She turned back one final time. The smirk that spread across her face chilled me to the bone. "He knows how to touch me without asking if it's okay first," she said. The door slammed shut before I could even begin to process what she had just said. That was her parting shot, her final word in our marriage. A strike aimed with surgical precision to wound me as deeply as possible. It wasn't even subtle anymore, just pure venom delivered with the intent to cause maximum damage. I didn't follow her outside. I didn't yell or chase after her, or make some dramatic gesture. I simply sat down on the floor with my back against the wall and stared at the closed door, listening to the sound of her car starting up and driving away. The hallway felt empty now, and so did the entire house. But then something strange and unexpected happened. My hands began to shake, not from anger or devastation, but from something that felt almost like relief. It was as if something toxic had been pulled from my ribs. Some infection that had been slowly poisoning me for months had finally been cut out and removed. All the lies, all the gaslighting, all the slow drip of disdain and contempt she had been feeding me. It was finally out in the open, no longer hidden behind fake smiles and false reassurances. And for the first time in over a year, I felt something approaching clarity. The air in the house felt cleaner somehow, like I could finally breathe again. I didn't know if this feeling would last, but I sat there on the floor and let it wash over me. This strange mixture of loss and liberation that I had never experienced before. Her toothbrush was still in the bathroom holder, standing there like a forgotten soldier. Her robe still hung behind the door, soft and familiar reminders of the life we used to share. I gathered these remnants slowly and methodically, moving through the house like I was conducting some kind of archaeological dig through the layers of our relationship. I found a cardboard box in the garage and labeled it in big, bold letters. Not my problem anymore. I didn't play any music while I worked, didn't light a candle or try to make this some cinematic goodbye scene. I packed her remaining life out of mine in complete silence, treating it like the practical task it had become rather than the emotional ritual it might have been. Around midnight, when I was finally sitting in the quiet of my newly reclaimed house, my phone buzzed with a notification. I looked at the screen and felt my blood pressure spike. Derek M. had sent me a message directly. Yes, him, the other man, reaching out to me personally. I opened it with a mixture of curiosity and dread. "Guess you know now," his message read. "She says you're a good guy. I hope you stay that way." That was it. No apology, no expression of guilt or remorse. Just a line that felt deliberately crafted to rub salt in the wound, to remind me that they had been talking about me, coordinating their story, discussing me like I was some abandoned dog they were leaving behind. I stared at that message for a long time, reading it over and over again. The casual tone, the false concern, the underlying smugness. It all crystallized something dark and determined inside me. I started typing a response, my fingers moving almost without conscious thought. "You'll see," I wrote. I held my thumb over the send button for several long seconds, considering the implications. Then I deleted the message instead. Not yet. I wasn't ready to show my hand just yet. The next morning arrived with a silence that felt almost aggressive. Not the peaceful quiet of a restful home, but the hollow, echoing emptiness of a space that had been stripped of its purpose. It was the kind of silence that hums in your ears and makes the absence of sound into its own oppressive presence. I sat in the living room with a cup of black coffee, staring at the television screen that I hadn't bothered to turn on. The house felt like a museum now, filled with artifacts from a civilization that no longer existed. There was a throw blanket still folded exactly the way Jessica preferred it, draped over the arm of the couch with geometric precision. A pair of her silver earrings sat on the side table, abandoned like she had left them there as some kind of joke, a deliberate reminder that refused to leave. I kept replaying her final words in my mind, those parting shots designed to inflict maximum damage. "He knows how to touch me without asking if it's okay first." Who says something like that? Who weaponizes intimacy in such a calculated way? It wasn't just betrayal. It was performance art, a deliberate final stab that she had twisted on her way out the door. I went into what used to be our bedroom but was now simply my bedroom and opened the closet. Her side was completely empty, just a row of hangers swaying gently like wind chimes in a breeze. But on the floor, hidden behind a stack of shoeboxes, I found something that made me pause. It was a small black notebook that she used to write in during the first couple of years of our relationship. I didn't even know she still kept it, had assumed it was long gone or packed away somewhere. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened it. unsure whether I was looking for answers or just another punch to the gut. The entries in the notebook were short and scattered. Brief observations, notes about her moods, a few rough sketches of things that had caught her attention. But around 6 months ago, the tone and content had shifted dramatically. The writing became more introspective, more critical, more distant. One line hit me square in the chest like a physical blow. "He's still sweet, but I don't feel anything when he touches me anymore." Another entry from a week later was even more devastating. "I think I'm disappearing and he doesn't even notice." She had been slipping away from our marriage long before Derek ever entered the picture. That much was crystal clear from her own handwriting. But what struck me most was that she had never given me a chance to address whatever was happening between us. She didn't try to communicate her feelings, didn't reach out for help or counseling, didn't make any effort to repair what was breaking. Instead, she had chosen someone else as her solution and then systematically buried everything else under layers of resentment and blame. Then came the entries that mentioned him by name, and these were the ones that really cut deep. "Derek sees me," she had written. "Not like a wife, not like an obligation, but like a woman who still has value." "He said I laugh differently around him," read another entry. "I think he's right about that." The page immediately after that one had been torn out completely. I could see the ragged edges where it had been ripped from the binding, and I wondered what she had written there that was too revealing even for her private journal. I closed the notebook with trembling hands. This wasn't just about some spontaneous affair or a moment of weakness. This was about how frighteningly easy it is for people to rewrite their own history in order to justify the things they want to do. She had decided that I was no longer enough for her, and instead of working to fix what was broken between us, she had found someone else to blame everything on. That evening, I went for a drive with no particular destination in mind. I just needed to move, to feel the hum of tires on pavement and the sound of wind cutting through the cracked windows of my car. I passed through the downtown strip, driving past restaurants where we used to eat together, past the park where she had said yes to my proposal, past all the landmarks of our shared life. Everything looked different now, smaller somehow, less significant, like props from a play that had closed years ago. Then, like some kind of cosmic joke, I saw them together. Not holding hands or making out in public, but close enough that their body language told the whole story. She was walking out of some upscale wine bar, laughing with that genuine, uninhibited laugh she used to save for late-night conversations in bed when it was just the two of us sharing secrets in the dark. And there he was beside her, Derek, wearing a crisp, button-down shirt and maintaining that smug posture that suggested he owned whatever space he occupied. He was even wearing sunglasses, even though the sun had already dipped below the horizon, which somehow made him look even more pretentious. She looked at him like he was some kind of prize she had won, and he looked at her like she was already his possession. They moved together with the easy confidence of people who had nothing to hide and no guilt to carry. They didn't see me sitting in my car across the street. My engine was off, windows up, making me essentially invisible to them. But I could see them clearly, and the sight didn't hurt in the way I thought it would. It didn't tear something vital out of my chest or make me want to scream or cry. Instead, it confirmed everything I already knew, everything she had denied and minimized and tried to make me question. It had never been just one dinner. It had never been just drinks. It had never been just anything. Back home, I stared at my phone for a long time, looking at Derek's message that still sat there unanswered. "Guess you know now, she says you're a good guy. I hope you stay that way. Stay that way. Stay quiet, stay passive, stay in the background where I belonged." I opened the message thread again and started typing a different response this time. "She lies easily," I wrote, and this time I hit send without hesitation. No reply came back, and I didn't expect one. But I felt better having said it, having put that truth out into the world where it could do some work. The next day, I did something I never thought I would have to do. I scheduled a meeting with a divorce attorney. The decision felt surreal, like I was making arrangements for someone else's life rather than my own. The lawyer's office was everything you'd expect from a place that specializes in the systematic dismantling of failed relationships. Cold, clinical, sterile, the kind of environment that smells like legal documents and suppressed emotions. The receptionist gave me a practiced half smile when I walked in, the kind of expression that suggested she had seen 100 versions of me just this week alone. Another man with dead eyes and too many complicated thoughts, another casualty of modern marriage. I filled out the intake form mechanically, checking boxes that reduced the complexity of my situation to simple yes or no questions. Infidelity? Yes. Spouse aware of intent to file? Not yet. Shared assets? Unfortunately, too many to count. The attorney's name was Rebecca, and she wore efficiency like armor. Sharp gray suit, glasses she probably didn't need, but wore anyway to project authority and competence. She didn't offer me condolences or false empathy about the end of my marriage. Instead, she got straight to the business at hand. "When did you first become aware of the infidelity?" she asked, her pen poised over a legal pad. "It's been going on for months," I said. "Maybe longer than that. I honestly don't know the full timeline." "Do you have documented evidence of the affair?" "More than enough," I replied, sliding my phone across her desk. I showed her the email screenshots, the text messages, even the photo I had taken from my car that night when I saw Jessica and Derek walking out of that wine bar together. They weren't holding hands in the picture, but their body language communicated everything that needed to be said. The way she leaned into him, the way she looked at him like she had forgotten her own married name. Rebecca scrolled through the evidence silently, her expression remaining professionally neutral. She nodded once, then looked up at me. "Based on what I'm seeing here, you'll want to move quickly with the filing." "I'm ready to move as quickly as the law allows," I said. The meeting lasted exactly 40 minutes. I signed the initial paperwork, provided all the necessary information, and set the legal machinery in motion. Walking out of that office, I felt a strange numbness settle over me, like I had just completed a complex business transaction rather than formally ending a chapter of my life. But maybe that's what betrayal ultimately does to you. It doesn't make you scream or rage or throw things against the wall. Instead, it slowly transforms your deepest emotions into paperwork, turns what used to be love into signatures on dotted lines and filing fees. That night, completely unexpectedly, she came by the house. It was nearly 10 o'clock, and I was in the middle of packing up books when I heard the familiar knock at the door. I opened it to find her standing there, but this was a different version of Jessica than the one who had walked out with her head held high. She was wearing sweatpants and a hoodie with no makeup and her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. This wasn't Jessica the weapon, carefully crafted to inflict maximum damage. This was Jessica the ghost, pale and uncertain, and somehow smaller than I remembered. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I stepped aside without saying anything, letting her enter the house that was rapidly becoming unrecognizable. She walked in slowly, like she was touring a museum of her former life. Her eyes scanned the living room, taking in the sealed boxes and the empty spaces where our framed photos used to hang. There were just white outlines left in the dust on the shelves, shadows of the life we used to share. "You're really doing this?" she said, more to herself than to me. "Yes," I said simply. She sat down on the very edge of the couch, her legs folded beneath her and her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I thought maybe you'd cool off after a few days. Maybe reconsider." "I'm not angry anymore," I said. "You're not?" She looked genuinely surprised. "No, I'm just done." She flinched slightly at those words, but she recovered quickly. "You sent Derek a message," she said. "Yes, I did." "What did you say to him?" "I told him that you lie easily." She didn't deny it. She didn't get defensive or try to justify herself. She just looked down at the floor and absorbed the accusation like it was something she had been expecting to hear. "I didn't want to lie to you," she whispered, her voice so soft I almost couldn't hear her. I almost laughed at the absurdity of that statement. "Jessica, you lied to me every single day for months. You came home every evening and smiled in my face while you were sneaking around behind my back with him." "I didn't mean for it to go that far," she said, still not looking up at me. "But you wanted it to?" I replied. "That's the difference." She nodded slowly, and I could see tears starting to form in her eyes. I was angry all the time. I felt ignored and invisible. I didn't know how to fix what was wrong between us. So instead of trying to fix it, you decided to break it completely. She didn't have an answer for that. She just sat there on the couch, quietly falling apart one labored breath at a time. "You didn't come here tonight to apologize," I said finally, my voice steady and calm. "You came here because you didn't expect there to be real consequences for your actions." That observation hit her like a physical blow. I could see it in the way she blinked hard, like my words had actually struck her face. "I don't know what I expected," she admitted quietly. I walked over to the mantel and picked up the one item I hadn't yet packed away, a framed photograph of us from 3 years ago. In the picture, her arms were wrapped around me, and we were both laughing at something genuinely funny. The laughter in that photo was real, unguarded, the kind of joy that can't be faked or manufactured. I looked at it for a long moment, remembering when we were those people, then handed it to her. "Take this with you," I said. "I don't need it anymore." She stood up slowly, staring at the photograph like it was some artifact from an archaeological dig. "What happens now?" she asked. "I filed the divorce papers today." Her jaw tightened, and I caught a flash of something in her eyes. Maybe regret, maybe panic, maybe just old habits trying to reassert themselves. I couldn't tell which, and I realized I didn't really care anymore. She held the picture like it was burning her fingers. Then, so softly I almost missed it, she asked, "Do you hate me?" "No," I said, and it was completely true. "But I don't recognize you anymore." She nodded slowly, accepting this assessment without argument. She didn't say anything else, just walked toward the door in silence. This time, she left without bothering to close the door behind her. I stood there in the doorway, watching her walk away for the second time in less than a week. Only this time, I didn't feel hollow or devastated. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: a sense of freedom. But freedom doesn't arrive with fanfare or dramatic music. It doesn't feel like victory or triumph. It's much quieter and heavier than that, like the first breath you take after surfacing from deep underwater. You're alive and you can breathe again. But everything in your body still hurts from the effort. The next morning, I woke up alone in that half-stripped house with none of the familiar sounds I had grown accustomed to over 7 years of marriage. No footsteps echoing in the hallway, no hairdryer humming behind the bathroom door, no gentle clink of her wedding ring against the ceramic coffee mug. I made breakfast anyway. Scrambled eggs and toast, nothing fancy. I didn't eat because I was particularly hungry, but because it was something I used to do for myself before I ever met Jessica. Reclaiming these small, solitary routines felt like carving my name back into the walls of my own life, marking my territory in a space that was finally mine again. Midway through eating, her mother called. Linda's voice was cautious and careful when she spoke. "Hi, sweetheart," she said. "Jessica told me that you two are going through a rough patch right now." I stared at the wall for several seconds, processing this watered-down version of our situation. Then I replied with simple honesty, "We're getting divorced." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Oh," Linda said quietly. "I see." Of course she didn't see. She couldn't see, because Jessica had fed her the sanitized version of events. "She told you I was distant, didn't she?" I asked. "That I made her feel abandoned or neglected?" "Well, yes, she did mention that you seemed to be pulling away from her," Linda admitted. "And did she also tell you that she's moved in with some guy named Derek?" I asked flatly. That question shut Linda up completely. The silence stretched between us for what felt like an eternity. "She what?" Linda's voice cracked with shock and disbelief. I repeated it slowly and clearly, making sure she understood every word. Then I added, "She didn't tell you that part of the story, did she?" Linda was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke again, it was almost in a whisper. "I'm so sorry. I had no idea." "She made her choices," I said. "Now I'm making mine." That was the last time Linda and I ever spoke. Later that same day, Jessica sent me a text message that appeared on my phone, like an unwelcome ghost from the past. "Can we talk somewhere neutral?" she wrote. I stared at the message for nearly 2 hours before responding. Finally, I typed back, "Why?" Her response came quickly this time. "Because I feel like everything spun out of control too fast. I need closure, and you deserve it too." I read those words over and over again, focusing particularly on that last phrase. You deserve it too. The irony of it was almost enough to make me laugh out loud. After months of betrayal and lies, after walking out of our marriage without a backward glance, now she was concerned about what I deserved. But I agreed to meet her anyway. Not because I wanted closure or needed to hear whatever she had to say, but because I was curious to see if she would continue lying even when she had absolutely nothing left to gain from it. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop downtown. Not the cozy little place we used to visit together on lazy Sunday mornings, but a different one entirely. Neutral territory where we had no shared memories to complicate the conversation. She arrived looking different than I had seen her in months. There was something quieter about her, more genuinely human. She wasn't wearing any war paint or armor, just jeans, sneakers, and a light jacket. But I recognized this softer appearance for what it was. Camouflage, a deliberate attempt to appear vulnerable and approachable. "I wasn't sure if I should come," she said, as she sat down across from me. "I didn't know if you'd yell at me or make a scene." "I don't yell," I said simply. "I know," she replied. "That's part of the problem." There it was again, the weaponized interpretation of my personality. My tendency toward calm restraint, my preference for measured responses, somehow transformed into character flaws in her version of our story. She stirred her coffee nervously, avoiding eye contact. You want me to say I'm sorry for everything that happened? No, I said. I want you to stop pretending this was about loneliness or feeling neglected. You weren't lonely, Jessica. You were bored. You wanted excitement and validation, a mirror that would reflect you back to yourself in a more flattering way than I was able to provide. Her face stiffened at my words. That's not fair. It's honest, I replied. She swallowed hard before continuing. It did start slowly, you know. The thing with Derek. It wasn't planned or calculated. You don't owe me the timeline anymore, I said. I'm not interested in the details of how it began or how it progressed. She nodded, then looked away toward the window. He knows that we met today. I didn't tell him we were going to talk, but he knows. Of course she hadn't told him. She was still keeping secrets, still compartmentalizing her life, still trying to manage multiple relationships without anyone having the full picture. Is he your future? I asked directly. I don't know, she answered, and those 3 words hit me harder than anything else she had said. That uncertainty struck me like a physical blow. Not the affair itself, not the months of lies and deception, but the realization that she had burned our entire life to the ground for something that was essentially a maybe. She had destroyed everything we had built together for a relationship that she wasn't even sure about. You're braver than I am, she said softly, breaking the silence. You were always braver than me. No, I said firmly. I wasn't brave. I was just committed to what we had. The silence that followed said everything that needed to be said about the fundamental difference between us. She had been looking for escape routes, while I had been trying to build something lasting. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small velvet pouch that I recognized immediately. What is that? I asked, though I already knew. My wedding ring, she said quietly. I can't keep wearing it, and I can't keep it in my jewelry box. It doesn't feel right. I didn't reach for it. I didn't want to touch something that had once symbolized our promises to each other. Leave it here on the table, I said. Give it to the past where it belongs. She placed the small velvet pouch on the table between us, and we both stared at it for a moment. A symbol that had once meant everything and now meant absolutely nothing. Just a hollow promise rendered in gold and precious stones. When she stood up to leave, she paused and looked back at me one final time. Do you still love me? She asked. I wanted to lie. Part of me wanted to tell her yes, just to twist the knife a little deeper, to make her feel the weight of what she had thrown away. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. No, I said simply. I loved the version of you that used to look me in the eye when she spoke to me. She nodded slowly, accepting this final assessment. Then she turned and walked out of the coffee shop. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I didn't watch her go. I kept my eyes on the table, on that little velvet pouch she had left behind like some kind of offering to the gods of failed marriages. 2 weeks passed after that final coffee shop meeting. 2 quiet, surreal, and oddly serene weeks that surprised me with how quickly I adapted to my new reality. I had expected the adjustment period to be much more difficult, filled with sleepless nights and overwhelming loneliness. The first few mornings were admittedly strange. Waking up in a house that felt half empty, hearing only the sound of my own footsteps echoing through rooms that used to buzz with shared activity. Eating breakfast alone while reading the news on my phone instead of making conversation across the table. But gradually the silence grew comfortable rather than oppressive. It was like slipping into clothes that actually fit properly after years of wearing something too tight or too loose. I began to appreciate the space, the freedom to move through my own home without having to navigate around someone else's mood or expectations. I made practical changes that felt surprisingly liberating. I changed the locks on all the doors, not out of spite or paranoia, but because I wanted to know that this space was truly mine now. I took down all the wedding photos that had been displayed throughout the house, carefully packing them away in boxes rather than throwing them out. I sold the mattress we had shared and bought a new one. Memory foam with no memories attached to it whatsoever. The lawyer called during the second week with an update. She hasn't contested any of the terms, Rebecca informed me. The paperwork is moving through the system faster than usual. I thanked her and hung up, feeling a mixture of relief and mild surprise. Part of me had expected Jessica to fight the proceedings, to make demands or try to complicate things out of spite. But apparently, she was as ready to be done with this as I was. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went out alone, not to escape or to drink away my problems, but simply to exist among people again. I chose a quiet bar I hadn't visited since before Jessica and I got married. A place with dim lighting, warm air, and soft jazz music playing in the background. I sat at the counter and ordered a bourbon with no chaser, savoring the burn as it went down. I was halfway through the glass when a voice behind me said, "You look like you just signed a peace treaty with yourself." I turned to see a woman, maybe in her early 30s, wearing a gray coat and carrying a cracked leather notebook under her arm. She had ink stains on her fingers and tired eyes that suggested she spent most of her time living inside the pages of whatever she was writing. "I might have," I replied honestly. "Are you a therapist?" I asked, curious about her perceptive observation. "Writer," she said with a small smile. "Close enough, I suppose." We talked for about an hour, and it was exactly what I needed. Nothing romantic or suggestive, just two strangers dissecting the complexities of life over drinks. She told me about a novel manuscript she'd been working on for 3 years that kept getting rejected by publishers. I told her about a marriage that had just ended after 7 years of gradually falling apart. We both laughed during our conversation, and it felt strange and wonderful to laugh again without feeling like I was somehow betraying myself or my situation. The laughter felt clean and uncomplicated, free from the weight of guilt or obligation. At the end of the evening, we didn't exchange phone numbers or make promises to see each other again. She simply said, "You're not broken, you know. Just scratched up a little. Keep turning the pages." I walked home that night feeling lighter than I had in months, like I could finally breathe deeply again without something constricting my chest. But that sense of lightness and freedom didn't last as long as I had hoped it would. 3 days later, Jessica showed up at my house again. I was in the backyard, trimming the hedge that she'd always complained was too wild-looking and unkempt. She stepped onto the back porch like she still had some kind of right to be there, like the property boundaries hadn't changed along with our marital status. "You look different," she said, studying me with those calculating eyes I remembered so well. I stood up from my work, gardening shears still in my hand. "So do you." Her expression was strange and conflicted. Not angry or apologetic, but something caught between the two, uncertain in a way I hadn't seen from her in months. "Can we talk?" she asked. "No," I said simply. She blinked in surprise. "Just like that?" "Yes, just like that." She came closer, wrapping her arms around herself like she was cold despite the warm afternoon. "I think I made a mistake," she said quietly. I didn't respond. I just let the silence stretch between us, allowing it to do the talking for me. "Derek's not who I thought he was," she continued, her voice getting smaller. He's intense in ways I didn't expect. Controlling, possessive." I remained silent, watching her carefully. "I didn't expect to feel like this," she said. "Like I traded everything real and solid for something that disappears the second I question it or push back against it." She looked at me then, searching my face for some sign of softening or sympathy. "I miss the way you used to make me feel safe," she said. "That's what I was to you?" I asked. "A shelter from the storm?" She nodded without hesitation. "I'm not a shelter, Jessica," I said firmly. "I'm a person with my own needs and feelings. You don't get to run back to me just because your weather got bad somewhere else." She stepped even closer to me, her eyes pleading in a way I hadn't seen since the early days of our relationship. "Can't we just talk about this? Can't we try to fix what's broken between us?" I shook my head firmly. "I begged you for honesty when it mattered, and you gave me cruelty instead. You didn't break this marriage with Derek or with what you did physically. You broke it with who you became in the process." Tears began to well up in her eyes, and for a moment, she looked like the Jessica I had fallen in love with years ago. "So that's it? It's really over?" "It was over the moment you walked out that door with your bags packed," I said. "Everything since then has just been paperwork." She looked like she wanted to say something more, like there were words fighting to get out, but she held them back. Instead, she turned slowly and walked away from me, heading back toward the gate that led to the front of the house. This time, I did watch her go, but I wasn't watching with longing or regret or any desire to call her back. I was watching with clarity, finally seeing her for exactly what she was, someone who had made her choices and now had to live with the consequences. The day the divorce was finalized, I didn't tell anyone about it. There were no phone calls to friends or family, no announcements on social media, no ceremonial bonfires of old photographs or love letters. I simply received an envelope in the mail, slid it open with the same box cutter I had used to unpack our wedding gifts 7 years earlier, and read the paperwork quietly at my kitchen table. It was over, final and clean and legally binding. And yet nothing about receiving those papers felt triumphant or victorious. It just felt real, like reaching the end of a chapter that concludes not with a dramatic twist, but with a simple period at the end of the last sentence. Later that evening, I walked through the house room by room, turning off lights and running my hand along surfaces that Jessica used to decorate with such care. Technically, everything was mine now according to the legal documents. But the house still whispered her name in certain places. The way the closet doors creaked when they opened, the small burn mark on the bathroom counter from her hair straightener, the recipe card still stuck to the refrigerator with a magnet from that trip to Charleston we had taken but never quite finished enjoying. I left all the lights off and sat cross-legged on the living room floor with a glass of water in my hands. I used to sit in this exact spot with Jessica after particularly long days, her feet resting in my lap while she leaned her head against my shoulder. Back then, things between us had felt easy and natural, or at least we had convinced ourselves they were. My phone buzzed with a text message and I saw that it was from her. "I saw the paperwork came through," she wrote. "So I guess that's really it." I didn't respond immediately. I just stared at the message, processing the strange finality of it all. She followed up with another message. "I thought I'd feel relief when it was over, but I don't. I just feel hollow inside." I looked at those words for a long time, struck by the irony of her emotional state. She felt hollow after systematically detonating everything we had built together, after walking through the ruins of our marriage like some kind of disaster tourist taking photographs of the wreckage. Finally, I typed back, "You don't miss me. You miss the version of yourself that I used to love." A minute passed, then 5, then 10. No response came. Then finally, her phone lit up with a simple message. "Maybe you're right about that." I didn't respond to that final text. Instead, I stood up from the living room floor and walked out to the garage, where I had been avoiding something for weeks. There was a sealed cardboard box labeled photos/letters/miscellaneous that I had packed away but couldn't bring myself to deal with. I opened it slowly, like I was defusing a bomb. Inside were years of accumulated moments. Birthday cards with handwritten messages, road trip snapshots from happier times, a dried and pressed rose from our 3rd anniversary dinner, a sticky note she had once left on the bathroom mirror that simply said, "Don't forget how much I love you." I carried the entire box out to the fire pit in the backyard. One by one, I fed those pieces of our shared history into the flames. Not out of spite or anger, not to symbolically erase her from my life, but to release myself from the weight of carrying them forward. I watched the paper curl and blacken, then disappear into smoke that rose up into the night sky. I didn't cry while I did this, and I didn't smile either. I just watched with the same calm attention I might give to any other necessary task. When the fire had burned down to nothing but glowing embers, I sat there in the dark backyard, letting the last sparks flicker out naturally. There's no formal ceremony for closing your heart to someone who used to live there. No ritual or anthem, just silence and the gradual settling of peace. That night, for the first time in longer than I could remember, I slept all the way through until morning without waking up once. It took several more weeks before I truly started to feel like myself again. Though, if I'm being completely honest, I don't think I ever really knew what myself was until after Jessica left my life. I had spent so much of our 7-year marriage contorting myself to accommodate her moods and needs, constantly adjusting my emotional volume to match her periods of silence, shrinking back when she needed space, and expanding to fill the void when she wanted more attention. Now, every single square foot of the house felt like an open invitation to breathe freely. I rearranged furniture to suit my own preferences, painted the bedroom in colors I actually liked, and finally took down that hideous copper mirror she had insisted on keeping above the fireplace. Each small change felt significant, and every brushstroke was like writing, "You're allowed to start over," on the walls of my own life. Then, completely unexpectedly, I encountered Derek in person. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was out grabbing coffee during my lunch break at the same place Jessica and I used to visit occasionally on Sunday mornings. He walked in wearing a pale blue blazer and sunglasses, moving with that same arrogant confidence I remembered from seeing him with Jessica outside the wine bar. He was alone, no Jessica in sight, and he didn't notice me at first. But I made the conscious decision to stand up, not because I was looking for a confrontation or because I was angry, but because I wanted him to see me standing on my own 2 feet, whole and unbroken. He froze when he recognized me, pausing near the entrance like the air pressure in the room had suddenly shifted. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. "I live in this town," I replied calmly. "I could say the same about you." He nodded awkwardly, his usual smugness replaced by something that looked almost like discomfort. "Have you been doing better since everything happened?" "I've been free," I said simply. He had the audacity to smile at that response. Jessica always said you were a class act about the whole situation. I didn't return his smile. She also told you that I'd never be able to look you in the eye again, didn't she? He shrugged, but I could see his confidence wavering. She says a lot of things. I took a step closer to him, not in a threatening way, but with the steady presence of someone who had nothing left to hide or protect. Let me guess what she told you about me, I said. That I was cold, emotionally distant, boring. That I had stopped touching her the way she needed to be touched. That I made her feel invisible and unappreciated. Derek blinked, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. She said the exact same things to me about you, I continued. He didn't respond to that, just stood there processing what I had just revealed. I leaned in just enough for him to hear me clearly. The truth is, she uses people like mirrors. When the reflection stops flattering her in the way she wants, she simply finds a new mirror. That's going to be you soon enough. His jaw clenched with irritation. You don't know her the way I do. I know her better than you ever will, I said with quiet certainty. And more importantly, I know what she's capable of. With that, I walked past him toward the exit, leaving him standing there to contemplate what I had just told him. No yelling, no threats, no dramatic confrontation. Just the simple truth delivered with the calm confidence of someone who had learned it the hard way. Later that evening, as if on cue, Jessica texted me again. I hadn't heard from her in almost 2 weeks, and I had begun to hope that chapter of my life was finally closed for good. I'm sorry, the message read. Just those 2 words, nothing more. I stared at the text for a long time, watching the cursor blink on my phone screen. I realized something important in that moment. She was no longer the villain in my story. She wasn't some evil force that had deliberately set out to destroy my life. She was just a symptom of a version of myself that had learned to tolerate half love and call it enough. I had spent months grieving the loss of Jessica, mourning the end of our marriage and the future we had planned together. But more than that, I had been grieving the loss of myself, the version of me that had clung to her so desperately, that had made excuses for her behavior, that had waited endlessly for her to become someone she was never going to be. Now I was someone else entirely, someone she no longer had access to, someone who had learned to value himself enough to walk away from relationships that diminished rather than enhanced his life. I didn't respond to her apology text. There was nothing left to say between us, and silence felt like the most honest response I could offer. Spring arrived quietly that year, without any dramatic seasonal transformation or poetic sunrise moments. Just the slow, unremarkable way that wind gradually warms up and trees remember how to breathe again after a long winter. I started running in the mornings, nothing too intense or competitive, just enough movement to feel my heart beating and remind myself that I was still alive and present in my own life. The streets I ran through were the same ones Jessica and I used to drive down together, past the same landmarks and familiar neighborhoods. But now, they felt like they belonged to me alone, like I had been given exclusive access to a world that had always been there, but somehow felt brand new. The world itself hadn't changed after my divorce. I had changed, and that made all the difference. I kept expecting some grand emotional finale to arrive, some pivotal moment where everything would suddenly click into place and I would stand in the shower or look out my bedroom window and think to myself, now I'm healed. Now I'm whole again. But healing doesn't announce itself with thunder and lightning. It doesn't arrive like a revelation or a dramatic plot twist. Instead, it creeps up on you gradually, building slowly like sediment, settling at the bottom of a clear lake. It sits beside you quietly one ordinary morning while you're making coffee, and you suddenly realize that you haven't thought about her in several days. That's when you know the worst is behind you. The final text from Jessica came on a Thursday evening in late spring. I heard you're seeing someone, she wrote. I wasn't, not in any serious or committed way. I had been having quiet, easy conversations over drinks with someone I had met at a bookstore. A woman who asked about my day and actually listened to the answer. Someone who didn't weigh me down with unmet expectations or emotional baggage from previous relationships. But Jessica's message wasn't really a question seeking information. It was a fishing expedition, a hook cast into waters she no longer had any right to navigate. I didn't take the bait. I'm doing well, I replied simply. I hope you are too. That was my final line in our story, the last words I would ever speak to her. She didn't respond to that message, and I was grateful for her silence. Maybe she had finally understood that whatever door had once existed between us was now permanently closed and locked. The truth is, this entire experience stopped being about Jessica a long time ago. It wasn't about her betrayal or her affair with Derek, or even the painful way our marriage had ended. It was about the version of myself that I had abandoned in order to love her. The man who had systematically silenced his own needs and desires in order to keep the peace. The man who had mistaken endurance for loyalty and neglect for emotional strength. That man was gone now, and I didn't miss him. There was just me, the person I had been before I met Jessica, and the person I was becoming after her. I don't hate her, and I don't spend time missing what we used to have. I don't fantasize about revenge or karma coming back to settle scores. She'll carry the weight of her own choices the same way I carry the weight of mine. So here's what I've learned from this whole experience, and I'm writing this for anyone who might be reading and sitting in their own quiet aftermath of betrayal, wondering if they'll ever feel whole again. You will heal, but not because you get the closure you think you need. You won't heal because they come back apologizing, or because life eventually punishes them for what they did to you. You certainly won't heal because karma rides in like some avenging angel to balance the scales of justice. You heal because you make the conscious choice to heal. You stop waiting for an apology that will never sound the way you need it to sound. You stop rereading old text messages like they're sacred religious texts that might reveal some hidden truth. You stop asking yourself who they are with now or what they're doing, or whether they ever think about what they threw away. Instead, you start asking yourself who you are when you're not trying to be what someone else needs you to be. You start remembering what it feels like to wake up in the morning without immediately thinking about someone else's mood or expectations. You reclaim the quiet spaces in your own mind. And when you finally do that, when you stop waiting for external validation and start remembering your own worth, you realize that peace isn't something another person can take away from you. It's something you reclaim for yourself, one quiet morning at a time, one small act of self-care at a time, one moment of choosing yourself over the ghost of someone who chose to leave. The sun comes up every day whether they're there to see it with you or not. Your coffee tastes the same whether you're drinking it alone or sharing it with someone who actually appreciates your company. Your life continues, and if you let it, it gets better. Not different, not easier necessarily, but better in ways you couldn't have imagined when you were still trying to hold on to something that was already gone. That's the real lesson here. Not that people are terrible or that love is a lie or that trust is impossible. Just that you are enough, exactly as you are, and anyone who makes you feel otherwise doesn't deserve access to your life. It's that simple, and it's that revolutionary.